You are now in the deep end of horror.
And I will see the life run out of you.
Hello, my children of the popcorn. Today, I want to talk a little bit about my favorite actor, Peter Cushing. My favorite director is, of course, John Carpenter, and everyone else is very much second and lower. Peter Cushing is just barely edges out some of the other horror greats like Vincent Price and Bela Lugosi for a #1 spot. But Peter Cushing is my favorite actor. This is Max Rosenberg and Milton Subotsky, the founders of Amicus, and this is from Asylum. And of course I broke the frame, because I'm a klutz. Amicus, the friendly face of fear, right on the cover, Peter Cushing rising from the grave in Tales from the Crypt. A marvelous book, chock full of photographs, just the way I like it. In vivid red, the horror art by Chris Kupta. I just wanted to point out a couple of Peter Cushing in Shockwaves. And Peter Cushing in Tales from the Crypt. I love those. Speaking of Shockwaves, it's a guilty pleasure, but it's one of my favorite Peter Cushing films. Filmed in the Keys, near where I grew up. Starring Peter Cushing, Brooke Adams, and John Carradine. And Night of the Big Heat, starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. I imported this one as soon as I found out it was region-free. Horror Express, from Severin, which you can find really cheap nowadays. It's a Blu-ray. It makes Horror Express look beautiful. Horror Express has always looked terrible. This is another favorite of mine. Horror Express has often looked terrible because of public domain. But it looks gorgeous on this Blu-ray, and I thought it would never look better, but I was wrong. Peter Cushing in Corruption, one of the few films of his that I would call sleazy. Peter Cushing in a sleazy film. This is definitely a slice of its time. One I got recently, Peter Cushing, Legend of the Werewolf. I haven't yet watched it. This is one of the few Peter Cushing movies I have not yet watched. By the way, you won't see any of Peter Cushing's Hammer films here because I did all the Hammer films separately in a different video. And I have so many non-Hammer Peter Cushing films that it will take up the whole video. This 4-pack is the only place where I found Night of the Ghoul, also known as The Ghoul, which stars Peter Cushing, even though the others don't seem to really relate to it. The others seem to be, I guess, The Ghoul rises from the dead, so the others are zombie films. Island of Terror with Peter Cushing. This features the turtle monsters from space, but it's still a pretty awesome thriller. The Uncanny, which Severin put out last year. It's a lot of fun. It could be better, but still, it was a Peter Cushing one I didn't have at the time. The Blood Beast Terror. This one has a problem because it's hard to make a moth look menacing. But they try. And Peter Cushing's the best thing in this, of course. Like, he is in almost every film that he's in. And, oh, and here is Horror Express from Arrow. And I loved Severin's Blu-ray of Horror Express and thought it couldn't look better. This is gorgeous. This will melt your eyes if you have seen the original Horror Express and then you watch it on Arrow, on the Arrow edition. It is just amazingly gorgeous. They did a fantastic job. Another lesser-known one of Peter Cushing's, The Hellfire Club. A rollicking swashbuckler set in the 1700s. The Hellfire Club stars Keith Mitchell as Jason, an adventurous young man who returns to the ancestral estate after a lengthy absence to claim his lordship, only to discover that his cousin Thomas has taken over and turned it into a lusty den of sin and into a lusty den of sin, and it should be iniquity, but they've put inequity here, governed by an infamous secret society called the Hellfire Club. And Peter Cushing is in that. Another one that's forgotten of his is Mystery on Monster Island with Terence Stamp. And yet still another one, Bloodsuckers with Patrick Macnee and Peter Cushing. One of the few Peter Cushing movies I got to see in the theaters. I got to see in the theater when it came out was House of Long Shadows, Star Wars being the other one, of course. House of Long Shadows stars Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, and Peter Cushing, and John Carradine. And unlike Scream and Scream Again, the horror greats all get to act off of each other, and they all have a lot of fun with this. The incredible Amicus collection that Severin put out. You can see the tchotchke I have from it. The case is thin. The Vault of Amicus is all about Max Rosenberg and Milton Subotsky. There are hours and hours of interviews with them. But it also features over an hour's worth of Amicus trailers, which is fantastic. I mean, that's worth it, the disc itself. I love trailer compilations. The Asylum with Peter Cushing, of course. And Now the Screaming Starts. And The Beast Must Die. All of those are fun films. Madhouse with Vincent Price and Peter Cushing, and they do act off of each other. Also Robert Quarry, who they were really trying to turn into a horror star at the time, and it didn't quite work out, just like with Mike Raven and Ralph Bates and a few others. And the thing is, you can't just make somebody a horror star. They become a horror star, or not, but you can't just force it on people. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in The Skull, which is a lot of fun. The skull reference there is the skull of the Marquis de Sade. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in I, Monster, which is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by any other name. Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, Scream double feature. Peter Cushing is not in Vault of Horror, but he is in Tales from the Crypt in a very memorable role. Scream and Scream Again. This is not a memorable role for Peter Cushing. He appeared, if you blink, you'll miss his cameo in it. House That Dripped Blood, another portmanteau from Amicus. That's a lot of fun. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are both in it, but they're in separate stories. Torture Garden, another Amicus portmanteau that Peter Cushing is in, but I really love his performance in The Creeping Flesh. He's not in Brotherhood of Satan. But Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are both in The Creeping Flesh, and I love the story, and I love the ending to that story. The Skull on Blu-ray. I have to keep the DVD set because it's got Deadly Bees on it. Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, where Peter Cushing gets to play the aforementioned Dr. Terror, or Dr. Shrek. And those are my Peter Cushing films that are not Hammer. Thank you for watching. Click like, subscribe, or even comment below, because I want to hear what you think.
No fair.